Welcome back, Fantasy Fiction Fanatics. It's great to see you again, and I hope you're doing well. Today's class is going to be on the rest of the chapters for Enchanter's Endgame. So we are now finishing up the Belgariad series. This is going to be chapters 19 through the end. So we are going to be done with this series. We are finally getting to the ending and going to be discussing the ending, and we'll be starting a new book series from here. So I'm very excited to go ahead and talk to you about this particular book and seeing how it ends, what you think of the ending, and to just see how all of this wraps up. So hopefully you will enjoy this discussion today, and we will go ahead and be able to start another adventure in the near future. So hopefully you have been enjoying this series. I know it's a little sad to always finish up and be done, but at the same time it's really exciting to be able to see how everything ends and to be able to discuss exactly what we want about the story and absolutely every single aspect of it. So hopefully you enjoyed discussing it with me. Hopefully you enjoy this series and have been enjoying the story, because I definitely have been enjoying discussing it with you and seeing your thoughts and your feelings on it. So let's go ahead and jump right in and begin with our recap as always. So even though it was quite a few chapters, I believe it was like 7 chapters, and some of them were a little bit thicker than others, but I feel like we have kind of not that much that happens in this last set of chapters. We've only got like major things that are kind of all coming together for this ending, and we have a lot of our resolution at the end. We've got like a really thick last chapter, and we've got some major events that happen, but for the most part we're really kind of finishing up what's going on and seeing how this adventure ends up wrapping up. So we start with where we ended, with Zaketh transporting Polgara and Sinedra and Durnik and Erend all over to Torak. So they all get transported to Torak, and they're now in the possession of Torak and being in Meloria. And Garion is still traveling to Torak. He's in Meloria, but he's not exactly where Torak is. He's still working on getting there. So he is traveling with Belgariad and Silk in order to be this final leg of his journey to get there. When he finally is getting pretty close, we've got these hounds that Torak has that are some of his Grolem that have been turned into hounds are chasing them, and they are really struggling to get away, and they're even wondering if they're going to survive long enough to make it to Torak. But luckily, the prophecy has in advance set things in motion to escape these hounds. And a storm comes in that's, kind of delaying the hounds and covering their tracks. And he tells them which direction to go in order to make it to safety. And they do not only make it to safety, but they make it to Torak. And they arrive just in time to find that Zeder ends up killing Durnik. So they end up seeing that Durnik is killed, and Belgariad rushes to attack him, and they struggle, and they fall into a crack in the earth where Belgariad ends up sealing Zeder away for eternity in that earth, and it ends up being closed around him. And it seems pretty clear that Belgariad has no intention of ever releasing him for what he has done. And from there, Torak has woken up. He's already kind of awake a little bit, and he's continuing to wake up. And at this point now, he's pretty much awake. And he tries to tempt Polgara into accepting him and coming to love him, magically induced, of course, and to say, okay, she's going to become Torak's bride. But Garion helps her to defy Torak and to completely say, no, I do not love you, I do not want you, completely rejects him. And this ends up leading right into the battle that he's going to have with Torak. So they both grow to these enormous sizes, and their battle commences. In the end, Garion ends up killing Torak pretty quickly. He ends up defying him, saying that nobody wants him, kills him, and the battle is over. And the prophecy for the side of good is fulfilled, chasing off that other possibility of a prophecy. So from there, the gods all come and the universe end up mourning for Torak. And they all are sad over his body, but they do decide to help Garion to revive Dernick and bring him back to life. So this fulfills his role in the prophecy of being the man with 2 lives. And Garion helps facilitate the magic that is then brought to bringing him back from the dead. From there, they all head back to the Isle of Winds, where they are preparing for Sinedra and Garion's wedding. And Pol and Dernick end up getting married themselves. And then we end with Garion and Sinedra's wedding, and we witness that, and that is where we end this tale, is on that happy note of them getting married. So, like I said, even though it has a lot of things that we still learn and a lot of things that are still going on in these chapters, not a lot of main things. It's mostly just the main big things are happening, and we have our resolution there, and that is how we end these last several chapters. So they're still excellent chapters, just mostly focusing on these last big thing that's supposed to happen, and that is the Torak and Garion's moment of meeting and battling it out. And the victor is decided, and then we have our celebration. So the first thing I wanted to talk to you about is a little bit the focusing of how much buildup we have versus how much of the climax that we have. So if you think about it, we have basically 4.5 books of building up to this moment. I mean, obviously we have lots of other mini climaxes or climaxes for each book, where things kind of rise and fall. But as a story for a whole, we are using 4.5 books to build up to this moment of Torak versus Garion. And everything is pointing to, this is where we're leading to, this is where we're leading to, this is where we want to go, this is what we're doing. And in the end, it's like the actual battle only happens for like a couple of pages. It's not even like a full chapter, if I remember correctly. It's literally a couple of pages in this chapter where the prophecy is fulfilled. So it's very interesting that we have so much of this buildup, so much of this journey that we're racing against time to make sure that we meet right at this precise moment. And it's completely set up to be able to be in this moment. And then the actual moment that comes is so swift and so monumental and yet so quick. It's just swift and huge and grand, and yet in the scheme of things, it's like so a blip in a moment in the whole entire book as a series. Even in this particular book, it's still kind of like a blip in the book of how much time it actually takes to settle things out. So I just find it super, super interesting that the build up for this moment is so much more grand than the actual moment itself. We've been waiting for this moment, and it's done quick as a flash. And Garion ends up killing Torak after defying him. Obviously, Polgara also defies him. So we have this little bit of the moment of even build up for the actual battle where he's awake and he's trying to tempt Polgara, and we're like, oh, is she gonna break? Is she gonna go to him? And after she defies him, the battle begins, and they clash a little bit, and then boop, done. Garion just completely annihilates Torak's self-esteem and then plunges the sword through his heart. So I just think it's such an interesting thing to think about, is that we had all this build up for this moment, and the moment doesn't even last for very long. It's not like a drawn out battle like where, we've got 3 chapters worth of time where they're battling and they're deciding who's going to win, and the spectators are like, oh my gosh, like who's gonna win? Is it gonna be this? Is it gonna be this? Oh my gosh, Garion's almost dead, something like that. Like, it's not a big play-by-play. Instead, it's a moment that just happens in that single moment where they meet, they draw swords, and it's decided. Like, it's so quick. Not that I think I would have liked a long drawn out battle. I don't think that would have fit for this particular book, and I think it would have been harder to describe the magnitude of the battle. But it is kind of seem like, oh man, like all that tension and all that waiting and all that build up, and we're like, oh, done. Oh, it's over. Let's go ahead and celebrate and party. And I think it also kind of reflects how moments actually happen. I mean, like, obviously in our real world, we're not going about killing gods and like being the chosen one to do that. But we do have moments of things that are stressful for us. For example, job interviews or like performances or, moving to someplace new. And those kind of moments have all this buildup inside you because you're tense and you're nervous about it and you're thinking about it because you know it's coming. And you've got all this time where you're like, okay, maybe you know about this interview for 3 days in advance, something like that. Or you know about your move, a month in advance, and you're like prepping and you're prepping, and it's there in your mind like, okay, this is happening, I have to prep for it. Or, you're nervous and you're getting there. And then, for example, a performance that you have, you're prepping, you've got maybe even several months that you're prepping and practicing and rehearsing and stuff. And then the moment comes and it's over in a blip of an eye, and then you're just like, okay, like I guess now on to the next thing. Or, oh hey, that wasn't as scary as I thought it would be, and you like have your relaxation, like, oh my gosh, it's over. Even though really when you look back on it, it's like, oh my gosh, I was worried about all this and it was just over in a moment. It was over quickly. As somebody who used to do dancing a lot, that's how I always felt about dance performances, is we'd be like practicing for several months in advance, and then you have all the rehearsals and you have all the dress rehearsals, and then you have your main performance. And obviously, since I wasn't, obviously doing it in like a professional capacity where I've got, 10 shows to do, I just have the one, possibly 2 shows, depending on where it was doing. I sometimes had 2 shows for it, sometimes I had 1. And then it's like, oh my gosh, like it's already over. Like I had all this build up, and then the performance is done, and I'm kind of sad now because it's all over. So it reminded me of that kind of moment where it's like we have so much build up, and then the moment's over, and you're like, holy crap, it's already done. We've already completed our mission. And it's kind of a reflection of real life and how things happen in real life. Is sometimes you have to prep a lot more than the event actually happens for. Sorry, I felt like I kind of went in circles there. Hopefully you didn't think I was just rambling on. Either way, I'd love to know what your thoughts are on this conflict versus build-up, as well as if you think you'd like more of the battle, if you think it's perfect, yes, no, maybe so, whatever your thoughts are, I'd love to hear about it. Okay, so let's move on to Garion. Obviously, he is our chosen one. He is our main character, the one that has to defeat Torak. And he's the one that we've basically been following 95% of the time from book 1 to now. Of course, we've had our little bit of breaks, especially with following Sinedra and other things like that. But for the most part, we've been following Garion's journey. So let's go ahead and see where he ended up in these final chapters and how we feel like he might have changed from the very beginning. I definitely think in the end, Garion has been the character that has pretty much changed the most, has had the most growing to do, the most mentally changing, in the fact that he's not only growing up, so he's maturing and mentally changing that way, but also just changing how he thinks about the world, changing about who he thinks he is. He's had a lot of changes that have happened to him from when he was at Falder's farm as a kid, and has now had to grow up and recognize how the world works, has to recognize that he has magic, has to recognize that he's actually royalty and that he's supposed to lead the world, and has a great destiny of having to kill a god. I mean, that's a lot for somebody to have to change, and that's going to change your mental state. It's going to change how you think and view the world. So I think he's definitely matured from who he was back at the beginning of book 1, especially back at Falder's farm. So he is somebody who I really admire in how he has turned out. He is becoming very, very brave. I mean, before it used to be like, why me? Why do I have to use magic? Why me? Why do I have to do these things? Which is a change from, when he's a kid and he's like, oh my gosh, I just wish somebody would let me do something that's adultish, not have to be babysat all the time. But at the end here, he's just super, super brave and taking on Torak and throwing his, perfect future of like, oh, we'll be your parents and we'll be your future and you'll be happy, and just throwing it in his face and being like, I'm not going to let you tempt me. I am going to beat you and I am going to save this world. So he's become super, super brave and super mature, where he's just facing things head on instead of just being like, can I pass this responsibility on to somebody else? Does it have to be me? So I really admire him that way. I think that he has grown a lot in the fact that he is willing to take on things and to accept who he is and his responsibility very maturely now, and to bravely set off on a mission that could end up with him being dead. He has no way of knowing that he's going to live through it. Even during the battle, when he finally gets there, he firmly stands his ground, and he, has a moment of like, oh my gosh, like, it started and nobody said go, moment where he's kind of like caught in the headlights. But then the prophecy urges him to help Polgara, and he instantly takes over, and he's like sending all of his thoughts of Durnik to her, sending her the vibes that she needs in order to survive Torak's pull and his charisma of, trying to draw people in. So he is, and once that's over and he actually has to fight Torak, he is like in the moment, right then and there. He knows what he needs to do. He doesn't panic. He's not struggling all over the place. He's not trying to run away. He is super brave, stands his ground, and fights Torak and defies him right to his face, just like Polgara did. And he really does, what a king should do, what a hero should do, and that is to stand up and do the fight. So I think that he definitely shows that he's matured, that he's very, very brave at this moment, that he's got a lot of growth that he's had. Like, she's showing how far he's gone and how he has made it to the moment that he needs to be, of who he needs to be in order to win this battle. So I really applaud him for that. And then at the end, with me on this resolution, we see how much he's grown also in his interactions with Sinedra. So previously with Sinedra, he's been very immature. Not saying that she's not immature too, she is. But they always have like this kind of like when like they get on each other's nerves and they're like fighting to each other, and they're like getting on each other's nerves on purpose, and they're just wanting to make fights with each other. Like literally, I think in like book 3, they have that moment on the boat where he's like, I just want to fight with somebody. So he goes and picks a fight with Sinedra just so they can yell at each other. But in this one, he's very much calm. He's very cool. Cool as in not like cold. Cool as in like chill. He's like, whatever you want for our wedding, I will figure it out. He doesn't argue with her. He doesn't make a big deal out of all the demands that she's putting on him. He just takes it as it comes and just goes with the flow and is trying to make his fiancée happy. He doesn't get so flustered. He doesn't try and argue with her. He is very mature when handling Sinedra and her antics. And I think that really shows how much he's grown as well, is that he's no longer this little kid who is insecure and is, petty and not really understanding the seriousness of the world. Now he's faced a god and he's come back, and he's just happy to have someone who loves him that he can marry and make a life with, even if he's not quite sure he's ready for that. But it's always hard to always know when you're ready, I think. But that he just respects her and just is grateful to have her and is willing to go with whatever she puts on him. Though in the future beyond that, we'll see if he keeps up that maturity or if they are people who will just always be at each other's throats in a loving way. Because, we all know those couples that, they just argue all the time, but they really love each other. And they might possibly be one of those kind of couples. But at least in this moment, we see his maturity. We see he's just taking it on because he knows it will make Sinedra happy. I really think that Garion is somebody who really matures a lot. And I know from some of you guys who have talked to me about how annoying you think Garion is and you don't really like him as a main character. But I think at this ending point, you can at least appreciate for how much he's grown and changed. And he is now definitely a very different person than when he started back at Falder's farm. Whew. Okay, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the ending as well. Because of course we're ending this whole entire series. So how does this series end? How does this whole conflict and idea end up ending? End up ending. Great, Amy. Let's see how many times we can say end for Enchanter's endgame in this video. So, first thing that I think is really interesting about the resolution of all of this is how many weddings that there are. I mean, I'm trying to think back to other fantasies that I've read, like high fantasies, epic journeys. I think this is the only one that has so many weddings at the end. Like, usually there's like one main wedding, but everybody here is getting married. And I think it's hilarious that Garion even mentions, he's like, what is happening? Is everybody just randomly getting married now? Like, why is it all happening right now at the end of everything? But we've got Ariana and Hitar, who got married before Garion. Dernick and Pol are getting married on the same exact day as Garion. We've got Taiba and Relg, who have already been married, and Relg, who's still a little shocked that he's married and is having to adjust to his mental thinking about how that's going to work out. And then obviously Garion and Sinedra are getting married. So we've got 4 different couples that have gotten married at this ending point. And Garion is even well aware of this and is like mentioning it in the plot. And I think that's hilarious, is that they're pointing it out even with the characters being like, what? Why is everybody getting married? So we actually end the whole entire series at the end of Garion and Sinedra's wedding. So the whole ending is all about celebrations and weddings and new beginnings. Because that's how I see the weddings to be portrayals of, is that this is a new beginning for many of the people who were in this epic journey. Of course, except Silk, because Silk apparently will never be involved in that kind of thing about tying himself to another person. But so many people in this journey, so many who have faced this danger with Garion as much as they could in their role, are now celebrating and having a new beginning. And now that it's safe the world is safe from Torak, they are free to do that celebration and free to enjoy the people that they love and to make commitments to them. So I definitely see it as, especially with Garion and Sinedra's wedding, is that is definitely the new beginning for the Isle of Wind, for the whole world as a whole. That is the symbol of that fresh beginning of a new ruler and a new queen and a new royal family that will be coming through Garion and Sinedra. So this is a new age and everybody is celebrating it. We do have the mourning from the gods and the universe over Torak. So it's not all happiness. We do at the right after Torak's dead, and obviously we have the happiness of Dernick coming back to life, but we do see that mourning period for the gods, and they are sad because obviously they did still care about their brother, even if he was not making choices that they could allow to keep happening. So we have a lot of this celebration, a lot of this happiness, but we do also have the mourning and the sadness that comes with a death of any kind, whether it was justified or not, or needed or not. We do still understand that, hey, this is a loss to this world and a loss to the people who cared about him. So I like that it has a lot of the celebration and a lot of the goodness, but then also has the acknowledgement that not everything's great, and that there was a cost that had to be paid in order to get there. Not only by the people who had to do the journey and had to battle it out, but also for the gods who really did love their brother. And even though they accepted what had to be done, it was not easy for them to let him go. We still have one prophecy around, so obviously that prophecy is not completely gone or dissipated. He is still talking a little bit to Garion, and he might make an appearance again in Garion's life, depending. But that prophecy now has been fulfilled, and whatever comes from that, and whatever the world is supposed to be from that prophecy being fulfilled, will now be continuing to go. So the other one I think is super interesting is that both of them were kind of like sentient. Like, they're not really beings. I mean, they're just part of the universe themselves. But they are sentient and can communicate in some way, and they have that whole talking episode, and then one of them dies, the other one dies because it was not fulfilled. But now we have one prophecy that is making up the universe, and we will see, possibly, if you read the Malloreon, since there was another series from David Eddings, that possibly that prophecy will then continue to feed the world after this point. And then obviously I just mentioned that we have another series after this, or that came after this, but we see that there is an opening for that already in the fact that Garion is talking about how Zaketh is still a big thing and could possibly then be coming back and wanting to attack the world again and like trying to take over past Meloria. So there is still a small enemy out there that has not been resolved, but it's one that is a distant one and possibly not one that will be needing to be taken care of. But it does leave that possibility, and the Malloreon. Yes, Malloreon. I was like, am I even saying that right? Malloreon is a series that if you guys read it, you'll find out if that is what is part of that story or not. But it does leave a little bit of an opening in case he wanted to make more of a story, and he ended up doing so. Yeah, so I think that's kind of what I wanted to cover about the ending is kind of how we've got that celebration, we've got these little openings and these little moments in there, and then we've got a lot of celebration and a lot of wedding and a lot of love and happiness from, you know, not being taken over by an evil god, which makes sense why people would be happy for that, and to want to make a new beginning of this new world that they're in that is free from the overhanging fear that Torok will return. Last but not least, let's go over the nitty gritty. So I have a couple things for the nitty gritty. The first one is, did you realize that Pole had feelings for Dernick before the ending? Because I feel like, even though I've read this book before, and I knew that she had feelings for him and married him and everything like that because I've read it, I still feel like even this time when I was reading it, it's like her feelings are like way under the radar. Like, we have a couple little moments that maybe you could guess that she did return Dernick's feelings, but she's like cool as a cucumber around Dernick and around anybody. Like, she doesn't really make any big notions or any big moment. There's no like moment, there's nothing that she says, nothing that she does that like I feel like you can peg her and be like, yes, she definitely loves Dernick. That's going to be a thing in the future, at least me personally. And I felt like this time I was really looking closely. Like, obviously we're discussing it and I'm trying to really pay attention to all those little details and try and not let them pass me by. But I still feel like she never really gave any indication that she was in love with Dernick until this ending moment, where then we realize, oh my gosh, she does return his feelings. We always knew that he loved her, but it didn't seem like she really was all that interested in him. And we were, at least, you know, when I first read it the very first time, I was wondering if that was just going to be a unrequited love. But it ended up working out very well for Dernick, and she ended up really loving him, and that love ended up being able to push back Torok himself. So I just really love to hear your thoughts on whether you caught that romance in advance. I like how that rhymed unintentionally. Romance in advance. But if you did, what gave it away for you? And if you didn't, I'd love to hear if you were shocked and how much, what you think of how that was done. Next, I do think that it's nice that we still have a little bit of mystery. Like, we don't have all of our loose ends totally cleaned up, and it's not in a bad way. And by this, I mean Erend. Erend is still a little bit of a mystery to all characters, to everybody involved. It seems like he is a very special boy, but we don't really know where he came from. We don't know how he came to be. He's got this little mystery still hovering over him of like exactly who he is, how he was able to handle the orb then, like, and stay this complete innocent, and who will he grow up to be, and what other abilities and knowledge might he have that we haven't seen yet. So nobody, even the bad guys who raised him, don't even know where he came from. And it seemed like it might have been that Erend found Zaketh and presented himself as an opportunity, versus Zaketh finding Erend and raising him and deciding to do this on his own. So I like that there's still that little bit of mystery where you're like, what the heck's happening with that? But not in a bad way where you're just like, oh my gosh, like, how could the writer not answer this? It's more like there's still these mysteries in the world that you haven't unraveled yet. And even the characters haven't unraveled it yet. So I liked that about it. Last but not least, I think it's super interesting that at the end here, Ul is presented to be actually the father of all the gods. So he is a little bit different than all the gods, and it makes sense now why he at first didn't have any humans that he was in charge of as far as creating them and being their god, is because he really was kind of the keeper of probably all the gods, and the fact that he was their father. But then he ended up being the god of some of the humans, and they all especially like when we're seeing all the gods talking to him, they do respect that he is now also has his own group of humans that he tends to, and is respectful of that, and they are respectful of him as their father. So that was something that was also surprising for me. That's actually something that, since I haven't read these books in a while, that I totally forgot about. That was a moment that I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't even remember that being the case. So it was a nice little surprise for me too, to find that out and to really think that that's super interesting. Though I do wonder, how does he create it with the universe? Like, how is the universe the mom? That's something that, again, is not 100% knowable, at least not on a human level. And I think that that's good too, because obviously humans are not gods, and so they have some of their own mysteries that you still don't understand and can't grasp those concepts unless you were also a god. So in the end, I feel like we have a lot of good things that happen in these chapters. We have a really solid conflict resolution to what happened. We've got Garion finishing his portion of the prophecy. We've got a lot of celebrating and a lot of new starts going on. And we do get to have these little kernels of unresolved things that are good unresolved things, and the fact that there are still mysteries in the world and there are still things to learn even after 5 books worth of knowledge and discovery and world building and the most knowledgeable people from this world telling us about it, and yet we still have mysteries that even the characters find mysterious as well. So really, really loved this ending. I thought it was really solid, really great, and I'd love to hear what you think for this ending and how it all wrapped up, and if you are sad that we're done, or if you are glad for finishing up this journey. All right, last but not least, before we go ahead and go over our trivia question and wrap everything up, I would just like to let you know that now that we are done with the Belgariad series, we are going to be starting our next adventure together, and that is going to be the Darksword trilogy is what we're going to move to next. It is by Margret Weis and Tracy Hickman. So I do know a lot of you guys do love the Dragonlance series and want me to do more of that, and I definitely will in the future. But in the meantime, if you want to read another series by Margret Weis and Tracy Hickman, or if you've already read this series and enjoy it, hopefully you will join me on this discussion. I think that it is another really great high fantasy series that we will be able to have a lot to discuss. It's going to be a little bit different, I feel like, than the last couple that we've been doing, just because it's got some different themes and some different concepts in it, and I'm really looking forward to discussing it with you. So hopefully you will join me for that set of books, and we can go ahead and get started on that soon. All right, let's go ahead and do our trivia question. As always, thank you so much to everyone who participated in the trivia question. I really, really appreciate you, and I'm really happy to see all of your answers. So the question for last week was, what did Dobby do after being freed? And the answer is that he worked at the Hogwarts kitchens. Or also, if you said worked at Hogwarts, I would have taken that as well. So congratulations to both Brendan and Christian. You must wash your elves before returning to work for getting the correct answer. Thanks again to everyone who gave their best guess. I appreciate you answering, and maybe next week you'll be able to get it right. I hope you will continue to play with me. For those of you who would like to join the trivia question, you can head over to the blog, fantasyfictionfanatics.net. It is over on the right-hand side on the desktop version. You're going to scroll down just a little bit and you'll be able to see it on the side there. If you're on mobile, you'll scroll almost all the way down to the bottom and then it will be there for you to answer. So hopefully you guys play with me and I would be happy to see your answers. While you're over on the blog, if you'd like to check out my content there, there's plenty more over there. There is book reviews, book recommendations, there's fantasy-related topics that I discuss my thoughts on. I've got some personal posts over there about me and my personal enjoyment of fantasy fiction and stuff like that. So hopefully you will find lots of content that you also enjoy over there. If you'd like to make a request for anything that is over on the blog for content that you'd like to see me make, please let me know. I would be happy to do so. You can also follow me on Facebook, which is /fantasyfiction1. I do upload or update you on everything that's going on over there, as well as on Twitter, which is @fantasyfiction1. Either place you can go ahead and follow me and get up to date on blog posts, YouTube updates, just other random stuff. If I don't miss a week or something like that, I usually post over there so that way everybody knows and can understand what's going on. So I'd love to be able to talk to you over there as well, since I do direct messaging through either spot. Or the best place and the most, my favorite place of all is going to be the Discord. So if you join the Discord, you can also talk to not only me, but other people who are fantasy fanatics just like you and are part of the Fantasy Fiction Fanatic community. So hopefully you will join us over there and you can talk to others about the books that we're discussing here, about other fantasy things, get recommendations, talk about things that aren't even fantasy related that you just might be interested in. We've got a lot going on over there. Lots of people already talking and chatting and having a good time. And of course, I'm over there for direct messaging or for in the group community chats as well. So hopefully we'll see you there. The link will be down below for you to join. And I think that's it from me. I hope that you guys enjoyed this discussion, and I will see you guys soon with another class. Bye.